Steel Curtain Network.
Touchdown! Touchdown para Calvin Austin! El Monte Washington es arma. ¿Quién más? ¿Quién más? DJ Watt!
What is going on, Pittsburgh Steelers fans, and welcome back to another Steelers preview podcast. Steelers season's over, but the preview exists. It still goes strong. I'm Jeff Hartman, joined by Bryan Davis and Dave Schofield. What's up, Bryan? How are you?
I'm so glad to be here, fellas. What a great day just to be alive. I'm just glad to be here, and I'm still glad we're talking Steelers, even though we're not talking about an upcoming game, even though it's a long time till they play again. It's just so, I still feel fortunate to be a Steelers fan.
All right, Dave Schofield, what's up?
Yeah, it's nice to be with you guys. It sucks that the tournament's over for the Steelers, but it is what it is, and let's spend some time with other Steelers fans.
Absolutely. And I feel like everyone on this show has had their chance to vent / get their thoughts out about last week's game. I don't feel the need to rehash that. Dave and his big bro Rich got to talk about it. And then also on Pittsburgh Standard Time, I've had Let's Ride to vent myself. Bryan had the Here We Go Steelers show and Bad Language. So I don't want to so much keep harping on the last game that we saw. And obviously we were all on the post-game show. So I wanted to talk a little bit about news and just what our thoughts are in the wake of Mike Tomlin's press conference on Tuesday. I know, Bryan, you brought up that J.J. Watt talked about his brother T.J. on the Pat McAfee show, and Jerry Dulac was on the Rich Eisen show. Bryan, is there anything in specific you want to talk about with those two gentlemen?
Yeah, Jer Bear did his thing. For some reason, he was wearing a Ravens color tie. I think he lost a bet because it had all the Ravens colors. It was actually a pretty tie, but then you think of Ravens, and you're like, ah. But, with what he was saying, he's like, look, Mike Tomlin is not going anywhere. That there's no way that you're going to see him go anywhere. But he really didn't give too much. He really didn't give too much information. What I thought was interesting is I'm a fan of the Pat McAfee show. So I watched the clips and I really thought it was interesting because Tone Diggs was talking and he's a definite Yinzer homer. And I get it. But then they brought J.J. Watt on. And when J.J. Watt came on, he was talking about, look, no, his contract expires next year. And Diggs says, oh, no, he's a Steeler for life. But when J.J. came on, he really didn't address that. He addressed that the defense fell apart. The offense wasn't good enough. And so he was very objective about the whole thing. But when talking about his brother, he's like, here's the thing about TJ. He knows that it's time to start moving around. And that doesn't mean, don't get scared. That doesn't mean about moving around the league. It's about moving around on the defense. Now, a few weeks ago, he was saying something like, I'm trying not to, take tackles and sacks away from other people by moving around. But I guess JJ's been talking to him about him, and now they want to do something so he's not getting chipped. So he's just not in one place, and it's a whole lot easier if you're moving that guy all around the defensive line to get him into places. They even talked about possibly having him go right up the middle in this short little segment. It was interesting to see. But what if I'm reading in between the lines? TJ in his mind is a Steeler for life.
Yeah, I saw those clips, and JJ was very just stone-faced when talking about the contract stuff. And they're like, well, they'll sign him again. He goes, he's only under contract for next year. I mean, I think that he in his mind is thinking if they're going to lock him up, they better do it. And you don't want him to finish out his final year of his contract. But Dave, when you hear that talk about TJ Watt moving around the defense, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, they talked about maybe needing to do that and then didn't do it. He lined up on the left side every snap in the wild card, every snap in week 18, every snap in week 17, every snap in week 16. In week 15, he had two. This is according to PFF, where they do snap alignments. Trust me, this is stuff the NFL looks at as well. This is their information that's actually worthwhile. He lined up so wide, he was considered in the slot twice in week 15. The only time he lined up on the right side of the line, you have to go all the way back to week 14, where he played one snap on that side. So he very, very heavy, but they break it down to where was he left end or left outside linebacker. That's basically on his, how wide was he getting? over 900 snaps at those two positions. And he basically was camped out there. Now, whether he lines up there all the time or they move him around, I don't care if they move him around pre-snap or post. Bottom line is, I just feel like the defensive front was just saying, okay, line up here, everybody win one-on-one in your gap. Like there wasn't any kind of creativity to try to free guys up really at all throughout the season. And they need that. They need that. That was a staple under Keith Butler. So whether it's going to be TJ Watt, he's going to benefit from it one way or the other. And it really is something that needs to happen, that they talked about happening, and it never really did.
Yeah, that's fair. To me, it's the same with Mike Tomlin's press conference on Tuesday. Right now it's all talk. And what do you expect them to say? There were a lot of fans that were upset about Tomlin's press conference. And I think there's things he could have done differently, but ultimately it's so fresh. It's only been a couple days since the season ended, and they're asking him look for definitive answers on like the quarterback position. Well, of course he can't answer those. That's why I said on my Let's Ride podcast, I'd prefer them to push. They say, we don't have a season ending press conference. If there's injuries of note, we'll let you know that through the PR department, and then have him speak like at the combine, or have him speak at another setting, prior to the free agency or something. I feel like that's more valuable, but nonetheless, I don't make up their schedule. But a lot of this stuff is all talk. We'll see what happens. And the one thing I do want to bring up with you before we dive into our forward or backwards title is Mike Tomlin said that he can see significant changes happening. Now, there are some people that are expecting big changes. Some people say that every year you have significant changes and it's just going to be normal offseason. When you heard that, Bryan, what came to your mind when Mike Tomlin said there could be significant changes in the offseason?
What does he consider significant changes? My question is a significant change to Mike Tomlin changing from Pepsi back to Coke or RC or Dr. Pepper? You know what I mean? Seriously, I mean, we've heard the significant changes thing from him before. I feel like that is kind of a stock answer. And if I'm going to be completely honest with you, I don't know how much I believe in it. I just know this week there was not an offensive coordinator change. I don't think there's going to be. They're going to see what happens with the Jets, with the Bears, and Arthur Smith. If he ends up leaving, they don't have to make a move there. Are we going to see anything on the other side on the defense with Terrell Austin? I doubt it, because Dave talks about it all the time. Jeff, you talk about it. The guys under contract situation with coaches, we think is probably one of the worst things that the Steelers do as far as how they employ their head coaches, how they would rather keep a guy around just because they don't want to pay him to sit on a couch. I don't understand that. I think that's one of the big things. I want to see how would have they done that this week on the defensive side of the ball and start getting moving. I don't know, but I kind of thought the press conference was a waste of time. I didn't listen to it. I listened to Dave Schofield in the recap.
Yeah. Dave, thoughts?
Well, it was a long press conference. And honestly, I thought Coach Tomlin, of the things that he could address and he could cover, was actually more candid than he sometimes is, and said things. But there were so many things that people want to know, that like, oh, well, how do you assess, Russell Wilson's season? Do you really think he's had time since that loss to sit down and assess their quarterback position in depth in a way to really answer that? And that's probably the first thing that they're assessing. Probably not. So yeah, there was that whole notion of you're not going to get those kind of answers. But when you ask about the change, there was a lot of change last year with the Steelers. And some of it was expected. We knew there was going to be a new offensive coordinator because partway through the season, they let theirs go. So that was going to be one of those things. We didn't realize we were going to be getting the quarterback change that we did. That didn't happen until the second week of March. So there's still plenty of change that can happen that isn't something that we should be knowing about right now. So I know a lot of people want change with the coaching staff, and I hope that there are at least some changes with the coaching staff. But at the same time, a lot of it's going to be changes in personnel as well. So we can talk about it now, but we're kind of like Coach Tomlin in his press conferences. There hasn't been much time yet to talk about what's really going to be happening with these changes, because we're going to see a lot of them much later.
I'm hoping to see some changes by next week, at least. I mean, if you're going to make a coaching change, you don't want to wait around, especially if it's a coordinator. You want to get in on the crop of available coaches if you're going to go outside the organization, which, Lord help me, if they fire Terrell Austin and hire from within, the fan base is going to implode. That's
look for Denzel Martin, I'm telling you.
Or Grady Brown.
I was thinking Curry.
Yeah.
There's a lot of internal candidates that they could definitely look at promoting, but all right.
Jeff, real quick on that note, I just want to jump in. There's some guys out there like the Antonio Pierces, the Gerard Mayos, that I don't think they're going to step into another head coaching role right away, and they're defensive guys. And I would probably go ahead and look at one of those guys and bring a guy like that in if you're going to make a change. Now, Antonio Pierce was not a defensive coordinator, but he was an aspiring one. He looked like he was going to be one. He was the linebacker coach of a very good team. I mean, excuse me, not a very good team, a very good defense. And I would think that they would look at a guy like that. Gerard Mayo is another guy. There are some people out there, like if Vrabel was not going to the New England Patriots and there was a situation where he was still on the defensive coordinator level, they would have brought a guy like that in too this year if they make a change. So I would be shocked if with those candidates out there, that if they're going to make a move, that they don't do it soon. But the longer it goes, it makes me feel like there's not a move.
All right, real quick, yes or no? All right, let's do buy or sell. Are you buy or selling Mike Tomlin saying that he doesn't remember if George Pickens was late on Christmas Day? Bryan?
If we don't swear on this show, but I would like to spell out BS. The biggest bunch of crap I have ever heard. That's one of the things I thought. For me, I thought he lost a little bit with me on that, because he knew, and that's not something you just forget. That's something they're like, Mike, George isn't here. He's like, God blessed, George isn't here. They know that, and that's something that just doesn't go away. That's a big deal. So no, okay. I don't like it.
Dave.
I don't know which one's buy or which one's sell. I'm just going to go.
Are you buying what he's selling, or are you selling it and saying, I'm not? No, there's no way.
No, I'm selling. His thing was he might not have realized that was out there to know how to cover that. But Bryan said something there that might not necessarily be the case. Seriously, if they could get away with it, if the position coach or the offensive coordinator or whoever, the PR person, for all I know, knows that Pickens isn't there, and they're like, Mike's busy. Don't upset Mike. Someone get a hold of Pickens. Make sure he's coming. If he asks about him, we'll tell him what's going on. But otherwise, we're just going to act like everything's fine. That could have been another approach as well. So, I agree with you, Bryan. He had to have known about it at some point. They really do, because that's not something you want to not have out there. But yeah, that might have been just one of those things of, I can't remember for sure. So let's not. Hey, and he had the perfect excuse. It was from 3 games ago.
Yeah, so, you know what? I'm going to jump in.
I still think he knows, but he had a good out by saying, "Oh, it's 3 games ago. I don't remember."
You guys are way too young to know this, but it was the biggest lie since one of my heroes, Ronald Reagan, said, "I don't remember if we sold arms to the Contras in Iran." Yeah. It was the biggest. To me, it was the biggest lie.
Can I bring up a comment?
Sure.
Even though I don't like it because they're yelling because it's in all caps. You guys know that's a pet peeve of mine. But Sam Gale says Tomlin is protecting George, but George is making him look bad. My question is, how much do we find out about crap with wide receivers? Well, other players too, mainly wide receivers, well after the fact. I mean, my goodness, how much do we hear more about how awful Antonio Brown was, who was someone who would have pulled this kind of stuff as well, that we, had to have his own place or whatever at training camp and things like that. These things that weren't really brought up until after they were gone. My goodness, Steelers fans were so upset that the Steelers did not have a plan when they traded for wide receiver 2, when they traded Deontay Johnson. Look at how that dude's been shuffled around. That just goes, I mean, to me, that's like, their plan was we had to get rid of this fast. And you didn't realize that it was necessarily bad with the Steelers until after the fact. So that's probably just George Pickens is another one that goes into that category. But stuff's coming out now. And to me, that makes the Steelers have to think long and hard, which we're probably going to be talking about here shortly, about about how they move forward with George Pickens.
Well, and this was not the only time or report that he had been late. There was the report earlier, I think it was early in the season, saying that he came in late after inactives were already announced before, eating Twizzlers, not caring. And it's like, everyone was just like, that seems a little far-fetched. And then again, you're like, okay, choose a pattern, Yeah. So, I don't know. Yeah. We'll see. All right, let's get to the topic of discussion today. We're talking about the offense, and we're talking about this 2024 season and looking at these individual players and saying, did they take a step forward? We'll even throw that they maybe stayed stagnant, or did they regress and take a step backwards? And so you're not going to hear us talk about players that we are going to think are not going to be on the team next year. So we're not going to talk about Van Jefferson. We're not going to talk about Dan Moore, because I don't think Dan Moore is going to be back next year. I think it would be, I think he's going to get a much larger deal elsewhere, because left tackles get paid expensive. But there are players that are under contract that are going to be back. We're going to start with the offensive line. And this is a tough one. We're going to start with Isaac Seumalo. Okay. Isaac Seumalo, who started the year injured. People often forget that. He had that pectoral injury, which some thought could have ended his season, but he didn't have to have surgery. So Isaac Seumalo, did he take a step forward? Did he stay stagnant, or did he go backwards? Bryan, we'll start with you.
I thought he took a step backwards. I'm going to say slight, though. I almost said stay stagnant, but I don't feel like he stayed the same. I thought he was better last year. So that's got to be a step backwards. I just didn't like his there were some gaffes that he didn't make last year. So I thought some things were glaring. So I would say Big Isaac, no, he took a step back. I'm not saying that he should go. I'm just like, he wasn't as good as 2023 Isaac Seumalo.
All right, Dave.
That's a really Bryan, I think, hit the nail on the head there. Exactly why, I don't know. He was pretty inconsistent. Now, he didn't play until week 5?
Yeah, I think you're right, because we said they could have put him on IR. So
yeah.
He missed 4 games.
Yeah. So he comes back from that, and it wasn't that he was constantly terrible. It just wasn't. I mean, he went from a B to a C+, or from an A minus to a B minus, something like that, where it's not like he was awful, but he was not the strength of your offensive line when he was arguably your best offensive line the year before. He was not, and I don't know that the offensive line wasn't massively improved from the previous year where he was the best, to where it was still like, oh, well, he's just playing well. It's just other people are playing well. That no. And he also had, his first year in Pittsburgh, he had 1 penalty. He had 6 this past year, and that was in less games. So that kind of goes into it as well. It just didn't seem quite to the same level it was the season before.
I agree with you guys. Step backwards for Isaac Seumalo. Hopefully, if he can stay healthy throughout the offseason, he has 1 year left on his contract, and you'd love to see him finish that contract out strong. All right, another one's going to be tough. I fully expect a Dave answer from Dave on this one. That's Broderick Jones, the right tackle, who was supplanted by rookie Troy Falatanu for a very brief period. He had some moments which made us shake our heads. But Bryan, do you think after all was said and done, did he take a step forward? Did he stay stagnant, or did he step backwards?
So I'm not sure if I love stay stagnant. I like stand pat almost more, just because.
Hold true. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think he almost stayed the same, and I don't think he took a step backwards. And I know I'm not even going to look at the live chat on that one because they're probably going to be upset with me on that one. I don't think he was worse. We just saw, but remember, we didn't see him until November 2nd of 2023. So I think there was some inconsistency to his play, but I go after the season. There was a time when we were saying the Dan Moore Jr. is probably going to keep his job in Pittsburgh. And then by the end of the season, Broderick Jones was a better tackle than Dan Moore. So I would probably say that he's where he was in a rookie year, because if that rookie year was 17 games, that rookie year would have probably looked a lot worse than what it was.
All right. What about you, Dave?
All right. So here's your Dave answer. You ready? Broderick Jones took a big step back to start the season. I expected him to kind of come in and pick up where he left off at, getting some experience and everything at the end of his rookie year. I didn't expect him to regress the way he did to start the year. That was extremely disappointing. Now, I will tell you this, though, where he was by the end of the year, game by game, over just the last few games, he might have been one of the Steelers' best linemen the last couple games, that he made it just past where he was at the end of the year last year. But it was still a problem because he started, if you look at the year as a whole, he started off so much more poorly than what he ended at the year before. You don't want to see that big drop off to start and then build back up again. So that's why overall, he might have ended the season better than what he ended the season last year, but the season as a whole was not as good because it took him so long to get there. Was that a good Dave answer?
Yeah, that was a perfect Dave answer. Great Dave answer. I'm going to say for me that it's a stagnant thing because there's peaks and valleys in both his rookie year and his second year. And we still don't know what he looks like at left tackle outside of one start in 2023. Now, Afton Forehead brings up in the live chat that I don't know about the rumors that he came into camp out of shape. If that was the case, it would make sense because Coach Kevin Smith, who went to camp, saw him in the sweltering Latrobe heat in a full sweatsuit. And that would make sense if he's trying to shed weight and they want him to lose weight. Not saying that's true or not, but that would corroborate with that assessment. Mm-hmm. But he did injure his arm. He injured his elbow. And I was at the tail end of training camp, I think, and he had to wear that big brace. And a lot of people were wondering if that had something to do with it. And as that brace
different,
it did.
He just didn't look right to start the year. He really didn't.
Oh my gosh. You remember the series he had in Denver when they put him in for, Tanu in for a series and then him.
He was not a dude that was mentally prepared to rotate. That he was not ready for that. And honestly, blessed. It's funny. I said he was one of the best linemen over the last few games. And yet he had the total bonehead play that we've all seen when both tackles pulled. You can tell by what the play was that he was the wrong guy going there, and maybe that was even part of his problem early on when he didn't seem right. Maybe part of it was paralysis through analysis. Maybe he wasn't as much because he wasn't sure of himself of what he was actually supposed to do. There's a lot of things that could have contributed to what it was that we saw. He is a guy that the Steelers really could get going on the right track, and it would be really important, but I don't know what it's going to take to do that.
I will say this too about Broderick Jones is I do love his personality. He's one of the few guys that'll stick up for his teammates. He's the one that runs to the fight and not just stands there and watches it. Say what you want about that, but let's move on. Let's go to our next offensive lineman. Let's talk about hopefully the new rock of the offensive line for the next decade plus. That would be Mr. Zach Frazier, second round pick out of West Virginia, WVU as they call it back in the Mountaineer State. Bryan, what do you think about Zach Frazier? Do you think he took a step forward, even though we didn't see him last year? Or do you think that maybe you weren't as impressed as you thought you were going to be?
Now, and I think Dave and I are going to probably completely agree on this. He definitely took a step forward, and here's the reason why. Even though we didn't see him, question to you: if they redrafted the 2024 draft, would Zach Frazier be a first-round pick? And I would say possibly, but I would say he would not fall to the Steelers.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, I mean, Jackson Powers Johnson fell too. Graham Barton would have not been picked where he was in the first round of 26, I think that was. Or
I mean, he was starting for a playoff team. I don't know how great he was, but it's the NFC. I'm not paying attention.
Yeah, but all I'm saying is Zach Frazier might have been your first center off the board. Is what I'm probably thinking now, if in hindsight. So yeah, he's they noticed him missing when he went out with that injury. And when he came back, did he have a perfect rookie year? No, but I would think he would make an all-rookie team.
Yeah. Kudos to Ryan McCullum, who did play well in his stead.
Yeah, yes.
He's just not as talented as Zach Frazier. Dave, what was your take on Frazier?
Yeah, honestly, I think that was really a key. Frazier went out. Ryan McCullum played well, but there was no doubt that Zach Frazier was the guy coming back because of what Zach Frazier was doing. I wrote an article today for SteelCurtainNetwork.com that talked about how injuries defined this rookie class. I mean, think about it. There were only 2 players from this rookie class that didn't miss time due to injury. And one of them got a starting job because of someone else getting injured. And the other one was a player that didn't get drafted till the end of the 3rd round because people were worried about his injuries. And he's one of the few guys that didn't get injured. So it was all about injuries for the rookie class. But even missing those 2 games, he came back and he was obviously the what is it, Joe Green Award winner?
Yes.
That's the rookie of the year. Yeah. That was the obvious choice. I'm happy that the Steelers have him. He just don't, I don't even want to say it. Don't Broderick Jones it. Don't show up taking a huge step backwards to start next year. And this guy's going to be the real deal. I mean, unfortunately, a couple of the best centers in the NFL are also the AFC, which makes things like Pro Bowl and everything. I mean, he's the only player on the offense. People might want to argue George Pickens, but there's just too much stuff going on with him. He's the only player on the offense that at least had a shot at the Pro Bowl this year.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I thought I was very impressed with Frazier, and I thought it was hysterical how the Steelers, Omar Khan's like, well, we have Nate Herbig, who could potentially be our center. Like, you're not. When you drafted Zach Frazier, you knew he was going to be your starting center. It was just a matter of time. I think he lived up to the billing for a rookie. Let's talk about another rookie before we take a break. Mason McCormick, 4th round pick, thrust into the lineup after James Daniels ruptures his Achilles tendon. Bryan, what was your take on the 4th rounder?
He has championship pedigree in in what used to be Division I AA. What's it now? FCS or I think it's FCS.
Yes.
Yeah, because the big guys are FBS. So FCS, at South Dakota State, they said that he had a mean streak. You can tell that he did when he came in. He was ready to play. You could tell when he came in that he and Zach Frazier spent a lot of time together, and they kind of were sharing the same brain, and that's in a good way. And so they have they're almost like a duo on that line. I don't think again, it wasn't a sterling rookie year for him, but it was very good. I would think that he's one of the bright spots on that offensive line. They think that they've got a guy for a long time in Mason McCormick. I think he gets picked on the 2nd day, possibly towards the end of the 3rd round, instead of waiting till the end of the 4th round, like the way he went. I think he was a great find. And a lot of people are, they're killing Omar Khan right now because he didn't pull the trigger on he didn't go bigger on Devontae Adams and didn't bring Ayuk in, but come on. He definitely, the scouting was very good with these offensive linemen and where they got them. And bringing a guard like that, that's the future. That's the reason you're not going to see James Daniels. So I would have to say a step up. And if there was a redraft, I'd probably say in the 3rd, he moves up maybe a round worth of spots.
Okay. Now, Dave, I'm curious what your take is, and do you think that Mason McCormick is the answer at right guard next season?
Yeah, what's interesting first is I can't believe I didn't have the article that Mason McCormick didn't even play in the playoffs because he got injured.
Yes.
Got to remember that.
Yeah.
That sometimes that was a little bit forgotten. Here's the thing with Mason McCormick. I thought he played very well based on the expectations of a 4th round rookie. You didn't expect much from him. Therefore, that's why he played well. If you want to compare him across the board, I mean, my goodness, I know PFF grades can be all over the place, but like for the season, his grade wasn't as good as Broderick Jones. But he was a 4th round rookie that was supposed to hopefully have a year of just being a backup to then be ready to step in there. And he had to step in there. I don't think it was the plan for him to be playing, starting and playing every snap in the NFL his rookie season. It obviously wasn't. They had Sayamalu, they had Daniels, I know we're not going to talk about him, but Daniels was doing very well when he got hurt. So if you're not judging him under the same measurement as Zach Frazier, or you would have Troy Fautanu or Broderick Jones, or those players with a better pedigree, or players that have more experience like an Isaac Seumalo, then he did great. I'm not even saying that he did as good as any of those other guys, but you've got to have somebody, players. You can't just have all 1st and 2nd round picks on your offensive line. I mean, you can, but that's really hard to do. So when you get someone that's the 4th round and that has that and stepped in before you even wanted him to because he had to and did what he did, it's not like he blew me out of the water. I do love his demeanor. I do love some of the highlights of some of the nasty streak and some of the fun, first down motions and things like that. Absolutely love him. But him doing a nice job as a rookie is with the context of he was a day 3 selection that wasn't even supposed to be playing yet.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think they're going to give him every opportunity to win the right guard spot next year, but I do expect him to sign some competition and see who wins. So we'll see what happens there. A lot of people were wondering if it's Daniels coming off a ruptured Achilles, and he is still young.
Is it Spencer Anderson?
Yeah, that's another one. That's true. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break. When we come back after the break, we have to finish up the offensive side with some skill position players. We'll still be doing some Steelers trivia. We'll talk some playoffs, maybe do some rapid fire picks, and then we'll be out of here. So if you're listening, you'll hear a word from our sponsors. If you're watching on any platform, we're not going anywhere. We'll be right back after this break. All right, Steeler fans, welcome back. Time for the second half and time to dive into the forward, backward, stagnant discussion with some skill position players. This next one's going to be interesting. I'm curious what y'all think. Let's go to tight end Pat Freiermuth. Signed his extension before the season started. Pat Freiermuth, did he step forward, stay stagnant, backwards? Bryan, what say you?
Well, if you look at touchdown receptions, he tied for the second best touchdown reception mark in team history, one below the leader. But I have a hard time saying that he got any better than he was. I kind of thought he stayed the same. He needed to take a jump and he didn't, especially with that contract. So I can't say that he got any better. The turnovers and the drops, I don't know how big the first drop in the playoff game was. I think it was big, but I mean, it was the first play of the game. But the last play of the game, Pittsburgh against Cincinnati in week 18, was egregious. The fumble on Christmas Day, even though we don't think they were coming back in that game, that just put the nail in the coffin. Those are things that cannot happen after you get that contract. That is something you expect out of a rookie or a struggling second-year bust. So I'm not saying that he got worse. I'm actually, you know what? He took a step back. Yeah, I will. I'm going to say it. He took a step back. Because more than I think about it, he should have, by not stepping forward, that's backwards.
Okay. What about you, Dave?
Afton took my answer in the live chat. The reason I'm going to say he held true was his blocking was better this year. And that's part of what it is to be a tight end. And although some people, because they're so fantasy driven, don't realize that, but he wasn't the liability in blocking that he had been in the past. I'm not saying his blocking was great. I'm just saying it wasn't all that good before. And his pass catching just didn't. You know how many drops he was credited with this season?
I'll say 5.
You were spot on. It was 5.
Nice.
But the question is, when were those drops? 3 of those 5 were in the last 5 games. So, and they were at kind of key, kind of important moments. So the thing is, I feel like he would hold true. But at the same time, what Bryan's saying, he's got a new contract now. So the expectation should be higher. So by not stepping up to those expectations of the new contract, I could see why someone could say took a step back.
So for me, I blame this on I blame Pat Freiermuth on myself. I had these expectations in my brain for Pat Freiermuth that I don't think he's ever going to be able to reach. I don't think he's that athlete.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I guess in my brain, I was thinking, okay, like Travis Kelce type. Travis Kelce's not a burner. He's not a Tony Gonzalez when he was playing. But I just thought Pat Freiermuth was better. I don't think he is what I had in my brain. I think what we see is what we get. I don't see him taking many steps forward. I hope he could do something better, whether it's not have key drops and key moments, maybe block a little bit better. I think he stayed stagnant, and that's depressing. Dave, did you want to say something?
Well, did he also have a quarterback that liked to throw to the area of the field where he should be making his living?
What were his targets? What were his targets this year compared to past years? I don't know if you have the stats up.
I could. I mean, well, to me, if I'm going to look at targets and everything else, I'm going to Pro Football Reference, and I had been up on Pro Football Focus. But
well, and
I've got it now. I've got it now.
You got it. Okay,
yes,
what do you got?
I was stalling while I was typing it in.
Right.
His targets this year were 78. His targets last year were 47.
Wow.
But he only played 12 games last year.
True. He was hurt last year.
In 2022, his targets were 98. In 2021, his targets were 79. One more with one less game than what he had this year.
Yeah.
So his targets went up from last year. But yeah.
Well, and Kyle Smith said in the live chat that his contract and his production are pretty in line. He did not have a high-end contract. Like, he did not set the market for the tight ends. He did not have a deal. Like, a lot of people saw the numbers and they're like, oh, that sounds like it's egregious. It wasn't. It was pretty much spot on. But the Steelers liked him enough to give him that extension before the season started. So, okay, what's up?
Can I say one more?
I'm going to say, I wanted to throw out a couple more key stats, if you guys don't mind, since I have them here. Okay. His yards per game went up significantly from the year before. The only one that was better was 2022. That was his best season yardage wise, and number of targets there, just not touchdowns. His touchdowns. He had 7 when he played with Ben. This is the first year he had 7 again. But the other thing is his catch percentage, best of his career, 83.3%. He was 68.1 last year, 64.3 the one before, and 75.9 with his rookie year with Ben. So those are some numbers to remember.
Okay, Bryan, what'd you want to add?
Yeah, so Dave did not take my stat because I have a stat here, and I thought the first down stats were telling here. As a rookie, he had 34. In 2022, he had 37. Of course, he was hurt. He only had 17 in 2023. And then he had 32 in 2024. And at this stage of his career, I expect him to have more first downs than he had in those years where he was more successful.
Oh, geez. Okay. Just think of how many times he should have had first downs. And these numbers don't reflect the playoffs, but my goodness, there's no reason he should have gotten that first down. Okay, I'm not going to get into it.
Well, it's against. He did it in Cincinnati too. There was the play where he didn't get across the line to gain in Cincinnati.
I think he did, but
okay.
Still.
let's keep with the tight ends and let's now go to Darnell Washington. So we have the year 2 of Mount Washington in the books. What do you think, Bryan? Step forward, stagnant, or backwards?
I have to say step forward because he got more targets, and he did when he's getting targets, he's doing stuff with it. He's moving it. He's hard to tackle after the catch. I just don't know why isn't he getting more targets? Is he not getting open? Is he that's the question. But I've got to say that the arrow points forward. Then I thought he was better than he was his rookie season because they used him more.
Yeah. Dave, what about you?
Yes, I agree with Bryan that he took a step forward. He was utilized much more this season, but not a ton more in snaps. He only played like 70 more snaps than he did as a rookie, but he was utilized at least as a possibility in the passing game. He caught the first touchdown of the season for the Steelers. He was, targeted. In that game against Cincinnati, they split him out there, had the great matchup, and the defender, the only thing he could do was grab a hold of his arm so he couldn't go up and catch the ball. And they called the penalty on it because you had to do it so bad or else he was going to get the touchdown. I would like to see him utilized a tick more, but I also understand that he's not this huge weapon. But if you throw it in there a little bit more often, it's going to make teams. He's just a huge mismatch potential. Why not take advantage of a big mismatch potential?
I think they have to figure out, listen, Darnell, like the coaching staff has to give him some guidance as we want you to slim down a little bit to get you a little bit faster, a little bit more agile, or we're trying to pack on the pound so that you're a tackle. Like, make up your mind, because the dude's like rumbling around, and it works. Like when Russell Wilson took over, they all those bootleg passes to him, which it's like a guaranteed 7 or 8 yards every time he touched the ball. But for me, stagnant. I thought if anything was a step forward, I'd want to see him. The blocking, obviously, we had that negated Jaylen Warren touchdown late in the season due to a holding call. You want to see those go. But I think they got to figure out what they want to do. I know that Jim Wexell of Steel City Insider is very much on board with him just becoming a tackle, having him bulk up and just be an offensive tackle. So I don't know what the Steelers are thinking, but let's move on and let's go to some other skill position players. Let's go to Jaylen Warren, who actually was banged up quite a bit in this season. This was an interesting year for him. Bryan, what do you think?
This one is tough for me because the stats weren't there like they were in 2023, but he was banged up. I thought he took a step forward as being reliable, and that's where I'm going to go with this.
Okay. What about you, Dave?
I'm going to say hold true. He got a little bit more involved with things, but he played more snaps last year than he did this year. So I wanted to see him used more because when he's out there, you really don't know if it's a run or a pass. I do think he's a very good guy in picking up blitzes, but he gets horrible grades on them because they think you have to lock on a guy and hold him up is the only way to pass block a guy when he just smashes into him in order to not let him come in and smash the quarterback. So you could look at it one way or the other. I do think he was banged up for a while. That's why I'm saying hold true. There was nothing that really moved the needle. I still would prefer him to be the guy that sticks around if they only keep one.
I agree with you, Dave. I think it was stagnant. He just wasn't on the field as much because he was hurt. He hurt his knee. I think he had a hamstring injury at some point. And so I'm going to go stagnant. Let's go to the receiving core now, and let's go to George Pickens. Another interesting case study here as George Pickens enters the final year of his rookie deal. Bryan, what do you think?
I'm almost going to say that he took a step back because he didn't take he should have dominated this year and he did not. And I could almost, I know his stats were decent, but there were games where he did absolutely nothing, because that Cincinnati game was egregious because he was pouting in that game. Mike Tomlin in the first Cincinnati game had to get him back on track by saying, "Hey, look at me, we need you." It's a step backwards for me. I want to see him in Pittsburgh, and I want to see him succeed in Pittsburgh. I don't want him to go. But if everything is happening and, we're having more and more antics, we're hearing more and more stories, and this latest stuff, that's all well and good. That's not a problem until it affects your performance. When it starts, here's the thing, in business, if you're late on expense reports, if you're late on this stuff, doing a training, doing all of this stuff, that's one thing, but you're performing, no one looks at it. But when you start not performing, all that stuff becomes glaring. And I'll say that stuff's even more glaring. And he did not have a breakthrough year like you would have thought he would have, with this being his third season. So no, just not good enough. So I think it's a step backwards.
All right, Dave.
Yeah, I'm going to have to say, because it's more than just the numbers, even though I'm the numbers guy. When you look beyond the numbers and the other issues, I'm going to have to say a step back. And here's the biggest reason. At the end of last year, there was little question as to if you were going to want George Pickens to stick around long term. Now there's it's very little that people do. That changed a lot. Now, you look at it, the numbers weren't as good. He had 240 less receiving yards, but and he played in 3 less games. But he only saw 3 less targets and 4 less receptions. He led the NFL in yards per reception last year. That was down almost 3 yards. His success rate, which is a thing that they do with Pro Football Reference, was 44.7, the lowest that he had seen. His catching percentage was 57.3, the lowest that we had seen. So there was a lot to go there. So it felt like all he was doing was catching the moon ball. You would think that he would have had more yards and everything with that. There was just too many times he wasn't reliable. And we look at that Cincinnati game and we're like, was he not as bigger part of the game plan because of what happened in Kansas City? I'm not in Kansas, against Kansas City. We don't really know. But all I know was that George Pickens is just a player that now seems he's not worth what he brings.
I agree. I think he took a step backwards, and a lot of that is between the ears, unfortunately. And like you said, Dave, you hit the nail on the head. A lot of people wanted him to stay next contract, and now people are singing a different song for sure. All right, let's do one more player, and then we're going to write in Bryan's thoughts. We're going to skip over the playoff talk. That's fine. Let's go to Calvin Austin III. Bryan, what about you? What do you think?
I'm going to be quick on this. I thought he took a step forward. I thought there were a lot of things that I saw from him, that he was a spark. There was a time towards the end of the season where I felt he was one of the more reliable guys, and he does play with heart. And I know this was a penalty and this really screwed things up for this team, but in Philadelphia, but when I see this little dude going to try to fight people, and I could hear on the highlights the names they were calling Calvin Austin, and it was just awesome to see. He's the kind of guy, I think you need a bunch of Calvin Austins if you have that kind of heart. He might be 5'8", but his heart is like the Grinch. It grows every time you see him play.
All right, Dave.
Yeah, that was his only penalty this season, which is interesting. Or at least his only offensive penalty this season. I don't know that he had one on special teams. But yeah, he had one. Did he have one touchdown return for punt return?
Yes.
One.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think he took a step forward, but I don't think there was much he was stepping forward from. I felt like after missing his entire rookie year, he really wasn't utilized other than the jet sweep guy at times much last year. I mean, they hit him on some longer passes, but just not week in, week out as much as everything. And I would like to see him get a little bit more involved. I don't like him being the guy that they throw it to as a jump ball on 4th and 15, but that's just, I don't think that's who he is. But I think there's other ways to get him going. But he also had some key drops and key moments that also makes it tough for you to trust a guy like that. But I think he took a step forward, but that's because there wasn't much that he was stepping forward from the year before.
I agree. I thought he took a big step forward. And so if you're wondering, like, why didn't they talk about Najee Harris? Why didn't they talk about some of these other players? We're focusing on players that are definitely going to be back next year. And Najee Harris could be back, but there's also a chance, I think it's a good chance, that he is playing elsewhere. So we have about 10 minutes left. Bryan, you ready to do your divisional round of bad memories?
Yes, I am. And this one is, there's so much to talk about. So don't start my clock yet. This is such a special one for me. Yesterday was you can start the clock. Yesterday was the anniversary of this game, 2006. We know it as the tackle game. We know it when Bettis fumbled. The Steelers were not supposed to go into Indianapolis, they were a fantastic team that year. They were undefeated for the longest time. I think they were 13-0 at one point before they lost their first game in 2005. Peyton Manning, Edgerrin James, that team was just cooking. And the Steelers came out and they took a 14-0 lead on this team. I had the privilege of having Verron Haynes in my car about 3 months after that game, where I was driving him to an autograph signing in Cumberland, Maryland. And I didn't want to bug him too much about the Steelers, but he was like, you can ask me any questions you want. I'm like, all right, what did you guys know going into that game? And he said, on defense, even though this is a running back, he said the whole thing was on defense. We knew that if we changed the play 2 seconds before Peyton Manning snapped it, we could confuse him. And that's really weird to say about a guy like Peyton Manning, who you think is a brilliant quarterback, who he was a brilliant quarterback, but they were able to mix things up on him. When Troy Polamalu, that phantom callback from the interception, when that went away, that was unfortunate, but that just set up the drama. Big Ben with the tackle on Bettis's fumble, and then the miss. And don't forget Bryant McFadden on Reggie Wayne. It was a fantastic game. It made me feel just rejuvenated as a Steeler fan, and that is one of the reasons they won the Super Bowl that year.
All right. Very good. That was always one of my greatest memories.
How'd he do? What was the time?
140.
Oh, that's not bad. That's not bad for that game.
No, it's.
I could have talked 3 more minutes on that. There was so much. There was
so much. He had to mention having Verron Haynes in his car. If it wasn't for that, he would have been under the time.
Verron Haynes was so cool hearing him talk about.
Yeah,
because I didn't want to bug him about stuff like that, and that was so cool.
Yeah, that is cool. All right, let's finish the show up with some trivia. Dave, you ready?
Yeah. Should I give you the final results of the over/under first?
I really don't want to, but
Jeff
sure.
doesn't want to hear it.
For some reason, I do.
Our champion was Bryan Anthony Davis with 61. He got 3 this past week. I got 3 this past week. Jeff only got 2, so that broke the tie, which put Jeff in last. Bryan was 61. I was 50. Jeff was 49. When it came to picking the game winner and the over/under, Bryan, we didn't get credit because we picked the Steelers to cover, and they did not.
Yeah.
None of us, I think I got 1 point in the last 3 weeks, and I was the only one, and that's because I picked Kansas City. Bryan, my goodness, you didn't have a point since week 14 in that. Jeff had 1 in there since week 14. That was it. But I won that one 15, Jeff 14, Bryan 13. We did not finish that off very well. When you think about those numbers, when that was 36, that was out of 36. And we didn't do well there. All right, trivia. This is not.
Hold on, Dave. Dave, hold on 1 sec. I forgot this super chat. I want to get this real quick. $5 from Kyle Smith. He said, if Tomlin needs time to assess why the team failed, isn't that an admission of incompetence? He's there every day, not like he's an outside consultant. I think he probably knows. He just doesn't want to say it to the media.
I don't think that's what the problem was of what he wasn't answering. I think he wasn't answering how individuals did over the course of the season. that he couldn't really break down in that regard. But I do understand what Kyle's saying.
Yeah.
I actually agree with that a little bit more.
All right, go ahead, Dave.
All right. Hate to talk about bad trivia, but we got to talk about bad trivia. Things that aren't good. Because for the Pittsburgh Steelers, once again, it's another season without a playoff win. And as we know too well, that the Steelers have not won a playoff game since the 2016 season. So from 2017 on, no playoff wins. How many NFL teams you might have already heard this out there, but how many NFL teams have no playoff wins over the same span? Since 2017, they have no wins.
Including the Steelers?
Including the Steelers.
Isn't it 3? Or it might be more than that. I don't know.
I don't answer until both of you guys put your answer out there.
I'm going to go ahead and say 2.
It's 8.
Oh, okay.
Really, that man?
Yeah, a quarter of the league hasn't won a game since the 2016 season. So now there's one team that hasn't even played in a game. Do we know who that is? We should know.
Carolina?
Oh no, they've played in the playoffs.
Have they?
Yeah, they played in 2017. Come on, it's the team that hasn't been there for forever. Their last time was actually against the Steelers, and they lost in the AFC Championship game.
The Broncos.
No, the Broncos played this year.
Oh yeah. Oh, I thought
this year still counts.
I thought you meant one in the playoffs. Okay.
Yeah, one. Someone that's not even played a game in the playoffs.
The Colts.
Well, the Colts, they were in the playoffs. They've even had a win. But you guys don't know the team that hasn't played in the playoffs? The team that hasn't played the playoffs since 2010?
It's not the Titans.
The Jets.
The Steelers,
the
Steelers beat them in the AFC
yeah.
Championship, it's the Jets. Yeah, the Jets have the super long stretch of not even making the playoffs. So they're one of the 8 teams. The Steelers are another of the 8 teams. Could you guys name the other 6 that have not won a playoff game over the same stretch?
I could have swore Carolina was on that list.
Carolina is on that list. They've played one game. They did not win.
Okay.
Giants.
The Giants they actually won a game in 2022.
As I say, it was Daniel Jones that got him his contract.
Yeah.
Atlanta Falcons.
The Atlanta Falcons in 2017 won a game before they lost.
The Arizona Cardinals.
The Arizona Cardinals is another. They've played in one game. They made it in 2021 and lost when they made it.
The Raiders.
The Las Vegas Raiders in 2021 made it and lost. So that's
what about the Seahawks?
Seattle. Did they win one last year?
I don't
know, but they've played 5 games.
Chicago Bears.
Chicago Bears have not won a playoffs have not won in the playoffs over that same span.
How many we have now?
That should be, I think that's 4.
I don't think the Chargers have won a playoff game. I don't think Herbert's ever won one.
They won one sometime since 2018. They're 1-3.
What about Miami?
Miami. They're 0-2. In 2022 and 2023 made it and lost. The other one you guys actually already mentioned earlier, so I don't know if I should count. That was Denver. And that was this year that they made it and lost. If not, they would have been another team that hadn't even made it.
Wow.
So those are the teams that the Steelers are in. And no other team has played more than 2 playoff games in that span. Unfortunately, the Steelers have played 5 and won none.
Brutal. Absolutely brutal. But all right. Ready for some final thoughts, guys? Go, Bryan.
Here we go with the long winter's nap. We'll be here, but Steelers have a lot to figure out, and I'm sure they're going to go ahead and they're going to make a valiant effort. A lot of people are afraid they're turning into the Pittsburgh Pirates. I'm not worried about that. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. So just keep the faith is what I'm going to ask you to do. Let me just go off track real quick. one of the greatest sports stars in my lifetime passed away today. And I hope, and I don't remember his name. I don't remember his name, so I'll just go ahead.
You can talk about it. Go ahead.
That's Bob Uecker passed away today, and we quote him all the time on this show. So Jeff, I apologize for, but
you're good.
This is just a true superstar, humanitarian, a good person. If you ever got to catch him doing a baseball game, I used to, when the Brewers would play the Pirates, I would turn on the Brewers feed to listen to this guy. Gone at 90. Rest in peace.
Yeah. Dave, final thoughts?
Yeah, we know that when it comes to our sports, a lot of it is what have you done for me lately? And Steelers fans only are as confident as their last game. And when they start to go the wrong direction and they pile on top of each other, it's really bad. The Steelers, when you break the season into quarters, the Steelers went 0-4 in the final quarter of the year. And yes, going into the season, I know how many people were here in the live chat and saying, oh, the Steelers, they really got to start hot because that end of the season schedule is so brutal. They're going to have to almost lock stuff up early to have any chance to still sneak in. And that's what happened. And it did. But it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And that's why it's such a bad taste in your mouth for what's going on. Now, as the offseason goes on and as the Steelers start to make changes, whether it's coaches or personnel, hopefully we start to then look at the season a little bit more as a whole, talked about what worked when it was working and those kind of things. Look at it to say, were the Steelers underachieving at the end of the season, or was it more that they were overachieving earlier in the season? Discussions that Steelers fans don't really want to hear right now. But you know what? I'm going to point those things out because that's just what I do. But that we still have time to heal over this process, and hopefully, most of the time when the last NFL game has been played in February, we can really start to assess things more realistically, less knee-jerk, more taking it all in. Unfortunately, I can't say I'm looking forward to that because we're in the off season, which just royally sucks. But they really, really blew it at the end of the season, and it really is more about how you finish. And the Steelers didn't get it done, which makes this really tough to go into this off season. But you know what? You can sit there and be mad about it, or you can actually try to have good discussions about what it would be to realistically turn things around, just a little bit more, one or two more wins. You're hosting in the postseason. You never know how it goes. It just seemed like this team wasn't at that spot when things went down when it did. So unfortunately, here we are. We're all going to have different opinions of what needs to happen. But most importantly, we just got to remember we're still going to love these Steelers just because it's ingrained within us.
Yeah. I'll keep mine short and sweet. Last week, I quoted the movie Miracle and got everyone fired up. And tonight, I think you just got to laugh sometimes. And so, as Bryan brought up Bob Uecker passing away, I'm going to watch some Major League tonight. I'm going to laugh hysterically as he calls games. If you watch that movie enough, you see that he did a lot of this ad lib where he calls a different game than what you're seeing on TV. Like when Willie Mays Hayes is up for the first time and he oopses it down the third base line, and listen to the call. Bob Uecker's going hot shot down the third base line. He dives and gets it. Oh, and he beats it out because it's a radio call. It's just hysterical. He was such a great guy. If you want to laugh though, go back on YouTube and look up Bob Uecker on Johnny Carson, The Tonight Show.
Oh my gosh.
I watched that tonight.
Yes.
He was on there so many times. That guy was a comedic genius. He did stuff for the WWF as well. He interviewed Andre the Giant once, which was hysterical. You've got to go back and check that out. But I absolutely love Major League. It is one of my top 10 movies of all time. I quote that movie so much. And there's a part of me that always finds some solace in the fact that a guy like Bob Uecker, although he passes away at 90, is never going to die. because they're always going to have those moments.
Oh yeah.
Brewers fan, you'll always have, even if you're just a sports movie guy, you'll always have Major League just a bit outside, tried the corner and miss. I can't believe hitters are laying off pitches this close. I could go on and on. But still,
and the Miller Lite commercials, they were great as well.
Oh yeah, great seats. I must be up in the front row. All right, that does it. Good show, guys. Dave, why don't you send us out like you always do?
Hey,
we'll see you next week on our Steelers preview.
Steel Curtain Network. Get it.
Everybody else gets a little tight.